This episode is brought to you by Hasa. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the Bottom Feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'll be joined again by Terry Arko of Hasa, and we're going to talk about something really interesting and really relevant to the pool industry, and that is water conservation. And this is a conversation that I think is really necessary in the industry. If we are to preserve the industry going forward in the future, we really need to understand a lot of the aspects of water usage. And Terry Arko is, I think, the renowned expert as far as conservation and water in general goes, and you're going to really get a lot of information, great information, from hearing Terry talk about conservation and the pool service industry. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. Yeah, and I think you wanted also to touch on conserving water. I think that's one of your biggest platforms that you've had over the years.
Yeah.
And so let's just switch a little bit to that. And you want to share a little bit about some thoughts on that? Because we've had a decent amount of rain in California, but it actually stopped. So it rained like December, January. I think it rained on the Rose Parade even.
Yeah.
But we've been drier than dry since then. And it looks like we're probably going to be below average again this year, unless we get lots of rain in March.
Yeah. And you never know, the weather's just so all over the place right now in this world. And I don't think you can ever really predict anymore exactly what's going to happen. I mean, hell, snow in Texas, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
right.
what's going on? But, I kind of, it's interesting because I'm getting ready. I'm writing an article on this, I think, for the next Ipsen that comes out on the water conservation. It's kind of interesting from my standpoint because of my history, and I go back such a long ways. And I started cleaning swimming pools in 1979. And, I didn't even, water was just a commodity. I didn't think about it. We hosed decks off back then. That was one of the first things we did when you got to a pool was you hosed off the deck, and you did it with copious amounts of water from that person's hose. We did drainings much more frequently, things like that, backwashing, things that, and I never, ever thought about what's going on with this water or anything like that. And that mindset didn't exist in the pool industry at all in the 70s, even though despite the fact that I think when I got in the industry in 79, California, and I was in California, Southern California had just gone through some pretty severe droughts like 76 through 77. But the restrictions largely back then didn't touch pools yet. Usually if there was a water restriction going back, way back, I'm talking like 70s and early 80s, the restrictions, if they would come were like, you can't water your lawn every day, or there was a watering schedule where, on this day you could water your lawn, on this day you couldn't. And it was some things like, if you can conserve your water by, 20% or something, your use, try and cut down your use. That was about as far as it went then. When we got into the 2000s, actually late 90s and into the 2000s, and then we had pretty California. I say we, and I'm living in Washington right now, but I'm a native Californian. So when I say we, but California had very extreme droughts from 2012 through 2016. And I think every successive winter during that time, there was very little snowfall, very little rain. It was getting pretty serious. And that's where all of a sudden you began to see the restrictions started going to pools and started pointing at pools. And it was obviously the industry got involved a lot in that, because one of the things that they were basically bringing to light was that builders could not even build pools during that time. They didn't want somebody building and filling a 20,000, 50,000 gallon pool during the extreme drought. That actually got shot down, I believe, during that time because of the industry and how the industry stood up against that. The industry did a lot to show how actually pools conserve more water than somebody having a backyard lawn and having to water that lawn. It takes more water per the space of the pool to keep a lawn green than it does to keep a pool going. So that's a conservation measure. And there's a lot on that. You know, anybody who wants to look into that more, they can go to the CPSA website and look up just, drought data on pools. And you can get lots of good information from that standpoint. But, it really started to go more towards pools. And I think that's where the awareness in the industry began to come in, because we realized that, we were possibly going to get penalized. This was going to be our bread and butter, and so we had to look at ways to turn that around. I feel like, just in late, and this has to do a lot with my history of, I worked for a company that was an environmental water company. And so we dealt with all types of water worldwide, not just swimming pools, but we dealt with drinking water, we dealt with industrial water, we dealt with wastewater. In particular, we went to countries that already have water issues, like Africa, India, places in China, and so forth. And we were looking to bring solutions, particularly on the drinking water side. And what I learned through that experience is that I think the most critical thing we're going to face in this world going ahead, among other things, is going to be our water supply. And that's going to continue to affect the pool industry. And I think even more so as we move along. Drought or no drought, I think there's going to be more and more focus is going to be given to swimming pools and to how swimming pools use water, which is why I wanted to talk about this issue, because first of all, I think it's important for all of us as pool service techs to begin to realize that we're dealing with water, right, in pools. And it's just every day we're dealing with that, and it can become benign. It can become something to where we don't think of it, and maybe we don't have, I guess I'll use the word, the respect towards it that we should, because it just becomes such a normal everyday thing. And we see it splashing out. We backwash a pool and maybe we let it run for a minute longer than we should have. And well, it's the big deal. Those kinds of things. And I feel like the industry, we're going to have to adapt more of a conservative issue. And I think that goes into how we do things, even down to what type of filtration system and what kind of filtration systems are we going to have. You just think of a sand filter. Sand filters, you've got to backwash them. And when you backwash them, you're running at 2 minutes, 3 minutes, however long it is. How much water is that taking? And how much water is being wasted that you don't need? And this is another thing. I just was in a discussion actually on one of the boards that I serve on, and the PHTA and the standards, they're bringing up more strict standards on backwashing for sand filters. And basically what they're saying is that, you should never backwash until your pressure and your PSI is at 8 to 10 PSI. There's no other reason you would need to backwash the filter like, hey, I'm just going to do it now because, even if it doesn't need it, because it does waste a lot of water. Sand filters, DE filters, you have to backwash those and clean those that way from time to time. And so I know that I teach in CPO, and I know cartridge filters have come a long ways, and you probably know a lot more about, the cartridge /DE or the different types that are out there. But definitely cartridges are going to reduce, that's a more conserving way to filter, I would say, because you're not going to backwash as often or readily with cartridge filters. And cartridge filters, you're cleaning them, but you're not backwashing. So these are things we're going to have to look at. Another thing that I'm very interested in that I've been looking at that I think I would even encourage, I think you probably know this guy, Harold Tapley. He's a pool builder. I think he's in your area. He's in Temecula area. But he innovated and invented actually a backwash system where the water can get filtered and recharged and actually get cleaned up and put back into the pool. So you don't have as much waste. And he's got this system available. He's been at the shows. He'll be at the Western showing this system. Things like that. I think anything we can do to recover water and reuse water. The other thing is I'll get to the big elephant that has to do, especially with drought. And that's the word draining. And so this is going to seem kind of counterintuitive, maybe, but I'm going to say that, how do I want to use the term? I guess I would say like maintenance and proactive gradual draining is actually a better way to conserve water in a pool. And what I mean by that is you set out a time, maybe it's, a couple times a month, monthly, maybe, just certain times where you have a goal to where you're going to drain a foot or two of the water and you're going to dilute it out and refresh that water back. And I actually believe that's a better way to keep your pool water quality good overall. It's a better way to conserve water because let's think of it now. And I can only speak for myself going back to the old days. And I hate to say the old days, but that's it. Where we just didn't have the mindset. We did no drain and dilutions back then. And back then it was just, okay, every 5 years or every 10 years, we're going to test your TDS. And if your TDS is extremely high, and if you're getting scale and things like that, then we're going to have to just drain your entire pool, do an acid wash, and refill it. And I think, from that standpoint, that's a lot of water going out. It's a lot of water being wasted. That's a lot of water going into the system. That's a lot of water coming back that's going to have to be treated. And that's more wasteful in my mind than gradual maintenance, proactive, smaller drainings to where you can actually sort of, I think the word I want to use is refresh the water. And I think that's a system that service techs need to get a hold of from that standpoint.
And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. I was going to say, too, those pools back then in the 70s were gigantic. So you're draining like 30,000 gallons of water.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. But again, that may not be necessary. If you can keep that pool diluted, keep it refreshed, you could really literally never have to drain the entire pool unless there was something that had to be done, obviously, or, plaster or whatever that has to happen, but it could be less. I mean, my goodness, I know pools we did where it was every 5 years, the same pool. We were draining it and acid washing it. And that just, there's lots of bad to that from the surface standpoint and everything.
You think the builders should be building smaller pools? I mean, that's kind of the trend here
That's
because
the
they're so
other thing.
expensive,
And they're right now, it's in Las Vegas, they are restricted. They can't build, at least for residences. I think it's something like the pools are limited now to no more than like 15,000 gallons. I think 12 to 15,000 gallons. They can't be more than that in a residential pool. So those restrictions are coming too. I think those are going to be restrictions actually. They're going to start to come as a part of that. But I think it's just from the mindset of let's think, how can we conserve water? I know there was another product I saw where it was kind of like a hose or something that had a sprinkler at the end of it. And when you're backwashing, you could water the lawn at the same time.
That's
Something
funny.
like that.
The one I like is the Waterco multi-cyclone, the pre-filter.
Yes.
There's a builder here, Blue Haven Pools, and they're putting them in every one of their builds because those save a ton of water because it picks up 80% of the dirt before it gets to the filter. So it reduces filter cleaning, and they're kind of ugly and gigantic, but effective.
Yes. Yeah. I've heard of those and seen those, and I'm very encouraged by that sort of thing. I think the other thing too that I've seen that has come to light has been the ion exchange and the ROI type, like trailer devices where, so if you're in an area, Phoenix or whatever, high hardness, you got to get that hardness down. You can still conserve water. There's a cost involved there, but I think, especially if you're during a time of restrictions where you cannot drain an entire pool, it's against the law because of the restrictions. These devices can be very helpful, and you can lower calcium, you can remove hardness, and you can freshen up the water. You can get phosphates out, you can get chloramines out, you can get all these things out. But then you can put that filtered ion exchanged water back into the pool, and you get very little water loss. There is some water loss, but not as much.
I think only 10% or 15%. And those trucks are gigantic trailers, and they cost like $100,000 for the actual company that has them. And if you walk through them at the Western Show, there's like a gigantic filter and a gigantic pump. It's pretty amazing that they can filter all that out of the pool and save like 80 or 90% of the water.
It's basically what it is it's kind of like a big portable water softener is really what it is. And I know that question comes up too, because about using softened water and that sort of thing. I usually get it more so with hot tubs, guys that are taking care of hot tubs in areas where water's very hard. And that's an issue in hot tubs to begin with, especially high calcium. And so they're like, the source water is so bad and it's just so hard to maintain these hot tubs. But the people have a softener, can I fill from the softener? And the misnomer that always comes from that is, I heard soft water is corrosive, and it's going to ruin the fixtures and everything. But that's a misnomer. And I'll tell guys this, because what you're dealing with in particular with naturally soft water, like here in Seattle, we have naturally soft water because, our water is mainly surface water. It's not water that has gone down to the earth and dissolved any rock and absorbed rock or calcium for that matter. It's very soft. But the other thing about naturally soft water is it's also very low in TDS, very low in dissolved solids. And it is the low dissolved solids that cause corrosiveness. Now, when you run water through a softener, first of all, that softener is exchanging one form of hardness for another. Usually calcium and magnesium is being exchanged for sodium. So you're kind of equaling it out with another different, softer form of hardness. The other thing is those water softeners do not reduce TDS. They do not lower TDS. So you still have TDS, whatever the TDS measures from that source water, which typically would probably be high if you're in a high hardness area. And so it's the TDS that will cause the corrosiveness. As long as you have TDS in a good range, 1,500 parts per million or above, you're not going to have corrosiveness or do any serious damage. And so I would say utilize water softeners when you can. And you don't really need to worry about that they're going to cause extreme corrosive damage like naturally soft water would if you did not treat it.
Mm-hmm. And I guess we can end by touching on the fact that you mentioned briefly about maintaining the pool properly. And I think this is something that we didn't do back in the 90s. We just used trichlor tablets, filled the floater up with 5 or 6 of those things. And then we figure we're going to drain the pool anyway in 5 years. Not a big deal. So there is something to be said about proper chemistry being a way to conserve water as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just a matter of understanding, we're all well aware at this point, I think, cyanuric acid and the proper use of cyanuric acid and the overuse of cyanuric acid and what that can do and what that can do to the amount of chlorine that we're going to need to add. And so running the pool at higher levels of cyanuric acid means, besides the fact that that's, a big increase in, especially with trichlor, if we're using a lot of trichlor, that can lead to alkalinity issues, that can lead to pH issues, which that's going to require chemistry or something to deal with. But chlorine, the more chlorine we use, the more we can be increasing hardness, we can be increasing total dissolved solids, all those things that are going to make it necessary to drain sooner, drain more frequently maybe as well. And then the mismanagement of, so what happens when you get algae, and what are you going to do with that? And in a lot of cases, that could lead to some draining. That could lead to, we got to chlorine wash the pool now because the algae's gotten so bad on the surface or whatever, so that's a whole nother thing, not to mention just, that algae is going to consume chlorine and we need more chlorine. And that's a whole wheel that spins around as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think we should also mention the macrocosm of this with all the pools around the nation. I don't know, 1.6 million or whatever. I don't have an exact number.
About 10 million, a little over 10 million.
Right, yeah, sorry. I think I'm talking more of commercial pools, but there's like 10 million residential pools plus commercial pools. And if you look at it from that perspective, every single person that can conserve some water at some level really helps out across the whole thing. It's just like the way they do people complain about California with their crackdown on emissions here for cars. But I can go walk outside in California, walk down the street, not have to be coughing. I was in Mexico a couple of years ago in Sonata, and you can't even walk outside. They have no emissions control. So
no, and I can attest as just being a kid who grew up through the 60s and the 70s before those emission controls were there. And even when I was starting to get into do pools in the late 70s, and those emission controls were not completely all there. And, third stage smog alerts and smog so bad. I lived in an area where I was probably 1 to 2 miles from the San Gabriel Mountains. And there were days where you could not see the San Gabriel Mountains. You didn't even know they existed because the smog was so thick and so bad. And that would affect your eyes, that would affect your lungs. And we actually had days at school where we couldn't go outside and play because there was a third stage smog alert. And that all went away when these emission controls came into effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think we should, I know that everyone's on a different spectrum, but you benefit from some controls. And I think with the conservation of water, we're going to all benefit at some point.
I think absolutely. And I think it's an important thing because there's so much going on in our world right now. And I mean, when you just think of, our groundwater from industry all the industries, food industries, agriculture, bottled water, all these things. And I've read a lot of books on this, and they all take from the same the same well in a sense, and it's our groundwater. And so our groundwater is what we need to kind of help us at times, when times are a little rough. And if we don't have our groundwater levels where they are, that's a tough thing. And our groundwater levels are getting really low. I read a thing recently about Lake Mead, and that's one, Hoover Dam and Lake Mead, which is, Las Vegas area and all that. And the levels of Lake Mead are so low, they're critical. And this one article I read said that if things remain the way they are, in other words, the water use and the water loss continues within the next 10 years, the level of Lake Mead will be so low that Hoover Dam will actually be useless.
Wow.
And so things like that, I think we need to think about, and we just need to think about our world overall. And I'm not talking about being some crazy environmentalist. I think it's a matter of stewardship. It's a matter of respect. It's a matter of knowing the industry that we're in. And do we want that industry to continue on, without any, harmful backlash? And I think it's just, maybe looking at water a little differently, understanding that it's not just benign commodity, it's a precious resource. And I think for all of us as pool pros or whatever, if we can look at what's in that pool as it's a precious resource, look at it as money,
right?
And I think if we look at it as money, we're going to use it a lot more frugally. And I think that's a good term and a good way to look at it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time, Terry. And I'll see you at the Western Show for sure.
Yes. Look forward to it and look forward to the future, and hope to see people out there.
All right.
Shows.
All right. Well, you have
Dave.
Okay. Have a great rest of your week.
You too.
And if you're looking for other podcasts, of course, you go to my website, swimmingprolearning.com. On the banner, click on the podcast icon. There'll be a drop-down menu with over 1,800 podcasts there. And if you're interested in the coaching program, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.